I'll go ahead and kick it off. Thank you for coming to my session. I'm Robert Reinhardt, CTO of VideoRx. I'm never really good at pitching myself or our services, but we have a long history of building custom players. I mean, I wrote the Flash Bible. I wrote lots of Flash books that had video as a specialty topic, and I've probably built more video players than I care to mention in Flash. I decided when Flash was starting to make an exit from the scene, I wasn't going to try and compete with HTML, JavaScript people, mainly because they don't get paid very well, and I just didn't want to be in that market. So I have other people I work with that do great HTML and JavaScript. I mean, that know Angular, JS, and all that stuff. And obviously, the guys at JW Player have really great developers too. And the price point for JW Player is probably one of the reasons why our smaller clients of VideoRx, if they ever, I would say for the vast majority of live broadcasts where I am brought in to configure Wowza streaming engine for a live broadcast, that JW Player by far is the go-to player. Most of the, I think I mentioned the 3 Fs in one of my sessions before. First, fabulous, or that the JW Player has been on the scene for a very long time, and so just most web devs, even if they're not video experts, know something about JW Player. And I just had a call this morning at 7 a.m. where it's like, oh yeah, we know JW Player. We haven't used 6 yet, but we use 5. So it just has been out for so long that you're going to, more likely than not, have a more easily accessible developer base that's going to be familiar with it, so it's not so hard to find someone to fine-tune JW Player. And that's what I'm here to talk about, really fine-tuning JW Player. Here's my contact information. I know how folks float in and out of sessions at conferences like this, so if you need to ask me a question, just grab me. I'm here actually to the end of the week. I'm sure most folks are leaving at the end of the day, but if you find me, I'm pretty easy to spot. Just feel free to ask me a question if we don't get a full Q&A in during this session. I also write articles. I'm one of the newest contributing editors for Streaming Media Magazine, and you can find a written version. It was a preliminary version of this talk in article form in I think it was how to build an interactive HTML5 player. It was in an earlier issue this year in Streaming Media Magazine. So here's my overview of the session. I'm going to cover all of these topics. Hopefully I'll get to all of them. I am known for speaking quickly, although I'm feeling a little sluggish today. Maybe you can't tell, but I will probably speak more slowly than I normally do. But these are the topics I'm going to hit on, and I'm going to just start from the top. So I'm going to first talk about skinning. Skinning is probably the one reason why you're not just going to use a fully free player like YouTube. I mean, you do have control. YouTube does have a Chromeless API. You can customize a player like YouTube, the same with Vimeo. But skinning is pretty important. It establishes the brand and it establishes consistency. I'm not a UX expert. I have UX guys on my team that are more fully conversant with UX best practices, but it's I think everyone, it doesn't matter what your trade is, understands that consistency with experience is pretty important. And it's still something that can be out of our control regardless of what player solution we use when we're talking about mobile browsers, right? Because browsers are browsers, and smartphone browsers are particularly annoying that a lot of them still, when you hit play on a video, they just take over the whole screen, and you're going to see the native controls that operating system is going to display. So it doesn't matter if we're using JW Player, Flow Player, any player up the shelf. If the operating system takes over video at any point, you lose control. And the only option there is to build a native app on your mobile platform of choice, or whatever platforms you want to support, and go that route, which of course isn't cheap. I should mention that JW Player did recently release their Android SDK, so if you like what you get with JW Player in browser, you can now approach them about licensing an SDK. So I always contextualize each of the, I'm going to contextualize each of these topics within a question because, you know, when you build experiences, when you build software, you come up with user stories. You have to know, well, why am I doing X, Y, and Z? There has to be a reason. So, you know, I put questions around this. So how do I control this video? That sort of seems pretty basic, but that's what the skin is there. It's there to inform the user about what controls you're making available to them, what you can do with the video. It should be pretty apparent as soon as you look at that play bar what you can do. And I really think that this is, I don't want to say it's one of those things that you just don't need to think too much about. I would say a lot of clients just go with the default skin. They don't even bother to do any skinning. But I have crazy requests from clients. I mean, clients that are government-based that know everyone in their organization is unfortunately using IE 7 or 8. They don't even have HTML5. Everything's being rendered in Flash. So what the Flash layer presents in JW Player is just fine, and they have no other requirements. So if they say, hey, can we disable the seek bar so they can't jump ahead in the video because it's sort of this pseudo e-learning environment or training, you can do that pretty easily. You just specify, you just have to know how to edit the XML. And again, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know how to edit XML. You just need a text editor, and I'm actually going to break, there's this thumbnail here, or this grab I have in my slide shows the seek bar being disabled. Again, that's only in the Flash realm. If you're on mobile smartphone, again, you're going to get the seek bar back because the Chrome of the operating system takes over. But it's just an example of one thing you can do if you wanted to add a logo to the play bar. And I've got Dreamweaver open here in the background, and I'm just going to go, this is my skin example. So the nice thing is that, like any good player, they're going to provide a lot of example files, and you can download, I think they've got a series of 6 default skins that you can choose from, and one of them's called Beckel. I guess that's how you pronounce it, Beckel? I don't know. You know, they're from the Netherlands originally, or Jerome is, so maybe it's got a different pronunciation than what my Midwest accent can pull off. But that XML file, you can see I just renamed it to no seek, and I'm just going to bring that XML file open. So you know, there's a lot of crazy gunk in here because there's pros and cons to this, but all the graphics that are associated with the skin are actually in, they're in bin hex, whatever, you know, it's all converted, binaries converted to ASCII, and so this is all able to be interpreted by native HTML, CSS, or Flash in the case of the Flash renderer. So I have a consistent one-stop place to go to edit my skin here. And again, they're named, and it goes you know, in a very Western tradition from left to right. So I can see I start with my background, then I have the caps, which are at the end of my play bar. I've got the play button, I got the play button over. If I keep scrolling down, you know, oh, it's like, oh, this is where the pause button goes. And they have tutorial documents on their site that tell you how to take a ping file that you've maybe made in Photoshop and convert it into the ASCII that needs to go into this document. But if you just want to remove something, which is, I would say 90% of our clients that need to do something custom with JW Player, it's just a matter of removing what they want removed. So if they don't like, a lot of folks have a problem with the HD pop-up because it's like, HD, what does that mean? Like they want a gearbox there instead, or something that looks more like a YouTube resolution changer. You can do that pretty simply just by coming into this XML file, finding the element that you want to change, put in your own equivalent of a graphic, and then you're done. And then you just have to pass it to the skin property that's in your JavaScript initializer here. So I talked about JW Player during my pre-conference workshop. So I'm presuming that you have some knowledge of just how web players work and that, you know, how JavaScript interacts with web pages. I'll just quickly say that this is my preferred technique. It works well with dynamically loaded video if you have CMSs running in the background that are on the back end that's controlling you know, the greater video experience. But you know, basically I have a div that is a container. You can name it whatever you want, and you basically have JW Player's code inject the player code into that div. So as long as you know how to control where you want that div to be, how big you want it to be, JW Player is just going to load whatever you've specified into that container. In this scenario, I just have a static MP4 file living on S3. I am specifying the skin file to be what it is there. One of the things that you should be mindful of if you are relying on HTML5 rendering, which all of us will at one point, you'll be on a browser that doesn't support Flash. Make sure your cross-origin the CORS. What does that stand for? I should remember this as a web guy, but there's this thing with cross-origin requests. So if your HTML file is loaded on your site and you're hosting things somewhere else, like maybe your skin files or your video files, you have to make sure that the host origin of that document is allowed to access resources. Otherwise, some browsers may not load the skin, or any other resources that are not existing on the same domain. So just a quick gotcha tip that, if you're pulling your head, like, am I doing my JavaScript wrong? Is there something that is it malformed or whatever? Chances are, if you're in the HTML5 rendering mode, most browsers these days are really picky. Flash isn't as picky. It depends on what you're doing with Flash. With JPEGs and PNG files, you can load them willy-nilly from any server. But if you're doing data requests in Flash, it is more specific with allowing cross-domain transactions like that. So I only mention that because all the things I'm going to be showing you rely on external assets to work. So in this case, the skin file is relying on the XML file to be loaded as a separate resource. You'll see it, in your calls if you open up the developer stack on any browser, and that's another quick tip. I'm going to just load this up to show you. If you aren't really familiar, like if your web guy's sick or you are the web guy, whatever, if you have let me just bring this example up. These are all live, by the way. You can probably see the URL in the window. So if you want to, sorry, not the skin. I'm looking for the HTML file. Safari, Chrome, they all have Firefox. They all have developer options, and this develop menu you can just enable in your Safari preferences. In Chrome, there's just another option to get to developer tools. But I can just say show web inspector, and it's going to show me everything that's going on. I actually prefer, why did I bring it up here? Let me go over to Chrome. Chrome's got a much nicer, in my opinion, and we're going to go over here to the tools, developer tools. If you ever have problems with external resources, again, I can just load this in here, and I can see every request. In fact, this is an easy way to see how the video, like, can I grab the video from the cache kind of thing? It will tell me right away if it can't grab it. This status column here is going to list something other than 200. 200 means the request went through as an HTTP request code. So you can see it's actually, since it's rendering in Flash, it's loading a cross-domain XML file from my S3 bucket that I have set up. So watch those cross-domain things. If your web page is being served from a different location than where you're storing assets, be sure to be mindful of cross-domain. If you need more education on that, just search cross-domain and you'll find a whole bunch of information on it. And again, you can always just open up, any browser has a network trace stack like this, and you can find out right away, like, is it something I did in my code, or is it something that's failing as a result of the browser not allowing something to be loaded into the sandbox. So going back to that example, you can see that that skin that I'm specifying, it's got a different rollover color as the graphic. Again, those are just all those PNG files represented in ASCII format. And if I start playing this, you'll see that there's no seek bar. And again, this will work well on with inline playback, like I'm doing here, where I have control of that domain. But on smartphones, where the OS takes over, we're not going to be able to disable the seek bar. So, and again, there's all sorts of event handling. I don't really cover JavaScript event handling in this session. It's rather straightforward, but if I need it, since there's no seek bar, if I need to do something after the video is done, I can still get an onComplete handler fired in JavaScript, do something next with this video, or maybe, again, this is typical in e-learning scenarios where you want to make employees watch something and you don't want to let them skip to the end and things like that. So now that I've talked, let me get back on track here with my slides. The next thing I want to talk about, let's give it a sec here to think about what it's doing. I should mention too, I'm running Wirecast right now, streaming my camera because I'm going to show my live stream as a DVR stream in an example later. So I'm building a buffer right now in the background of me talking so that I've got something to back up in time too. And that's a little, my machine might act a little slow. How do I control this video? We already talked about this. I'm not even going to load poster frames. Again, it sounds really silly, but I mean, there's a lot of video on the web that I find that doesn't have a poster frame, and it's not that hard. The poster frame sometimes can even, if you have a really bad video ingest, might be a really like a stupid black frame or a green frame, something that isn't really representative of the video. You can make anything you want as a poster frame. So again, it's something that you can do pretty easily just with the HTML5 video tag. Again, JW Player makes it all pretty transparent and consistent across Flash and HTML5 by just using its initiator to do that. And it's whatever you want, and it can be any file format that browsers support or Flash support. Flash and browsers pretty much support the same things: PNG files, GIF files, JPEG. So any of those file formats, of course. I'm not even going to. I mean, the code sample there. That's the only weird thing I think with JW Player is that they call it image. It's one of the biggest mistakes. If I'm just writing a quick player from scratch, I'll always call that attribute poster because I think that's just what it should be called, and it's image, and I think that's just a legacy thing. Poster is what it's called in HTML5, and it's again a really common mistake that even I'll make when I'm just quickly throwing out a player. This is more fun though, and this is something that I think whenever I show this to a client, or as an example, scrub bar thumbnails. This is pretty cool, and if you are in control of your encoding workflow, VideoRx has an encoding API. We use it with select clients. It's not like a Zencoder API or encoding.com where just it's open to the public. But I've set up FFmpeg to basically produce the thumbnail sprite sheet, and JW Player has this enabled, so I'll show you what this looks like. I'll do a bit of a deeper dive on this example, but basically VTT is a common track format now that's being used for HTML5 video tracks as assets. The problem is it's just not very consistent. So again, just like most off-the-shelf players, the off-the-shelf player, whether it's JW Player, Flow Player, they're trying to create a standard because there isn't a standard necessarily with some of these more enhanced features across the board with browsers. So you at least have a consistent API if you choose any of these off-the-shelf players that you can rely upon and know that they're doing all the work of making sure it translates into the tags and whatnot, or CSS that is necessary to make this feature work consistently across browsers. So again, it sounds like a pretty simple feature, but again, it's something. A web browser isn't just going to go out and try and create thumbnails from your video file. Maybe one day we'll see weird HTTP range requests going out to like make little thumbnails of video, but that's hitting your server a lot. So right now, this is the best case scenario where basically during the encoding process, and again, if you search, there's plenty of examples of FFmpeg creating this type of sprite sheet, and I'll just show you an example of what it looks like. I don't think I have the FFmpeg command on hand here, but let me bring up the thumbnail example here. And the first thing I'm just going to show you is this VTT file. So again, and this can be automated because it's up to you to determine the frequency of your thumbnails. I think my default is just every 10 seconds make a thumbnail that's going to go into the image that FFmpeg creates. I'm going to go ahead and just load this VTT file. So, and of course it's popping it up here, so it wants to know how to play it. Sorry. I'm going to go ahead and just choose Text Wrangler here. Sorry about this. I should have had it ready to go. But so here's the thumbnail. In fact, it's a little small, but it looks just like a caption track. It has time code, start and stop. And it specifies, and this is the fun part, it specifies a JPEG. You can have a different JPEG for every thumbnail if you wanted. If you want to just do it loosey-goosey or in a very manually intense way, you could, if you only have a few videos to show on a website, then you could go through at whatever interval you want for any time frame that you want and just specify a JPEG, PNG file for each of those time points. But you probably want it to be consistent, just like any scrub bar would work. So again, I automated the encoding API that I built to just every 10 seconds. So you'll notice that this goes in 10-second increments. And I don't want to keep track of, it could be like an hour-long video. That's a lot of thumbnail assets to keep track of. So I prefer just to have one thumbnail file. And I'm just going to show you what that file looks like. It's pretty cool. I mean, again, it's just amazing what you can do with FFmpeg. And here's that JPEG. It actually looks pretty cool. You can make some artwork with this kind of thing. If you, if I wrote the program, maybe I'd make a face with all these little thumbnails, like those cool mosaics do. But anyway, that's generated by FFmpeg. You'll see it you don't have to perfectly fit the grid. It ends with like a green square, just because that actually might be in the video. So this is just the clip I'm using for all my examples, by the way, is just one of these old press reels that was shot on film, probably 16 mil, called the Mighty Columbia. I'm into fishing, so they have a little salmon bit in there that I always like to watch, but it's free, it's public domain, whatever. So that's the example that's being used. It's SD quality, so it is what it is. But those are all the thumbnails every 10 seconds. Again, obviously some work to automate that process, but I just love that things can be lined up. I can line up FFmpeg with an API to generate this for every video that comes in to the system, and then it's just a matter of, and have that API make that VTT file. Again, it's all just that's simple math. It's nothing that complicated to do. And then it's just a matter of plugging that into whatever script generates your player in your CMS to reference that VTT file. There's the way that JW Player's initializer works here is that there's a tracks property. It's basically an array. If you ever see left and right brackets in JavaScript, that's an array. An array is just a list of items. So every type of track, I can just keep piling up the tracks. And there's a kind attribute. It's set to thumbnails. So when JW Player parses this, it knows, oh, here's the thumbnail track. So I'm going to go off and grab that. Again, make sure you be mindful of cross-origin requests here, because if you're hosting the JW Player code on one domain and your assets are somewhere else, this thumbnail will not load properly in an HTML5 rendering. So, and that's the other great thing about this, is that I love the fact that, again, it's all about consistency and playback. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up sorry, I don't want chapters. I want it thumbnails, .html. So I'll even change this code live. So right now, this is the Flash renderer. I can tell because when I'm right-clicking, I'm seeing the Flash player menu. And when I roll over, you can see I get a really because what's nice about this is that, browsers are pretty fast and Flashes too when it comes to slicing and dicing assets. But, there's just one request for a JPEG, and it's doing all that carving up in memory, right? It's like, oh, and it's really transparent and seamless. So and obviously this is most useful for long form content. If you have like a 30-second video, 3 thumbnails aren't going to really help you that much. So this is really meant for longer form video. But it's super helpful. And again, it's just something that I'm going to go ahead and switch this file to use HTML5 as the priority over Flash. And I'm going to go ahead and just push that to the server. In this part of the Columbia is Bonneville Dam and Portland. There you go, a little bit of a slow. Oh, come on. It's like less than 2K. And then I'm going to just reload this page, and I'll show you that in HTML5, the skin looks exactly the same, and I'm going to see this thumb, and I'll right-click it just to prove to you that I'm now seeing more of an HTML5 JavaScript created pop-up. I'm not seeing Flash Player. It looks and feels exactly the same, and those thumbnails are there the whole time. And I can jump to whatever point in the video, like, oh yeah, that's where he's dragging the logs. Great. So that's when I saw a red request there. What was that? What was that? Oh, it was just giving me partial content. So that really. It's a warning. That's showing you a range request in action. It's that's one of the nice things HTML5 browsers can do that Flash couldn't do natively without the help of some server magic over HTTP. Is just get a partial fragment of a file. It's one of those great things that you just get automatically with HTML5. Okay, so let's continue. So that's thumbnails. Again, that's once you have a workflow in place, it's not that hard to do it. Chapter markers are a little more tricky because you have to essentially, someone has to index the content and make it. But what I love, again, you get this consistency. You can see in that grab there that I have that not only can you have these thumbnails that come up, but you can start to mark them with titles as well. So, just like you would expect on any other kind of, long form content where you want to be able to jump around. So again, it's just like thumbnails, except in this case, I'm calling it chapters. You can name your files whatever you want. You just want to make sure they're, I prefer VTT. I think JW Player with certain features, like with captions, for example, they'll support SRT, they'll support VTT. There's different formats for different tracks that are supported, but VTT is a good practice a good format to standardize around, just because it's probably going to be what everyone uses for browser vendors for this kind of stuff. Once things start to solidify that way. And again, I'm just going to bring up the code here real quick. The chapters example. Bring this up over here. I think I call them markers in the HTML file, same difference. But and again, I'll just show you. It looks exactly like that other thumbnail file that I just had. So I'm going to bring up chapters. Again, it's just downloading it, and I'm going to open it. Oh, yep, there it is. So again, these obviously don't have to follow 10-second increments. I know it's a bit small there, but what's funny is that the first line is just a descriptor. It's currently not displayed by most chapter renderers that I know of. It's really the line that follows the time code, and all you need are those line breaks, those empty lines between each of your points to make sure that it's being parsed correctly. But you can see that introduction, Grand Coulee Dam, irrigation. Those are the actual texts that are showing. The first line is more of just an ID for you to know, like, oh yeah, this is, and I just, gave them numbers like chapter 1, chapter 2. Those aren't displayed. And so again, going back to the code, it's just a different type of track. So you call it chapters instead of thumbnails, and make a reference to it. Again, be mindful of cross-origin domain. Make sure your web servers are set up correctly for all that. And when I load that example, I'm just going to go ahead and, again, I wasn't consistent with I just closed the window. I'm going to go ahead and bring up that page again, clients. There it is, thumbnails. I'm going to load that one, and I'm just going to load the markers one. So this one, again, it's just going to, this is the flash render, but it's showing the chapters. Now, I specifically I didn't combine the thumbnails with this because I just wanted to show you that even if you're not generating thumbnails, you can use, these features are independent of each other. You don't need to use all of them. So I can just go over these little dots that are there. Again, that renders in HTML5. Results are going to vary on mobile. If you have a mobile OS that supports inline playback, more and more Android devices are letting you play video inline without taking over the screen. Hopefully we'll see iOS support that in the future. Once we see that full screen API carry over from desktop to mobile browsers, Chrome now on Android supports the full screen API. So you can do things like Google Map overlays with playing video on Chrome on Android, but it's only Chrome on Android. So that's a problem. But so again, you probably wouldn't see this working on an iOS, on an iPhone. On iPad, if you played it inline, you would see all these features working. As soon as you go full screen on iOS, again, the native Chrome takes over, and you lose a lot of this richness. But again, unless you're going to build a native app, there's not much you're going to be able to do about that. It doesn't matter if it's JW Player or you pay a developer hundreds of thousands of dollars. They just can't change the operating system, right? Okay, so those are chapters or markers. Let's go ahead and continue. I want to make sure I stay on track and get to all the goodies that I want to show. So we were talking about chapters, and now I'm going to talk about playlists. This is a fun feature too, because it doesn't, the one caveat I'll just say right away with playlists, and playlists are just basically organizing content around the player. You can put this list, they call it list bar, as a property in the initializer there, but it can be to the left, it can be to the right, it can be below your video content, it can be on top of your video content. You can position it anywhere. It doesn't work so well with the responsive layout property. I've had clients come to me before. JW Player does does support responsive layouts with the player itself, but with the playlisting, it gets a little tricky because at that point it's like, well, you have to specify, you have two elements now that are being rendered by JW Player, the list and the player. You have to specify your, the size, it can't be relative. In fact, I wouldn't recommend it be relative with the list bar because your titles might get cropped. It doesn't automatically word wrap. I think I've listed that as a bug, but if you have a really long title to show up in this playlist on the left side here, it will just bleed off screen and you won't even get a scroll bar for it. So you can insert line breaks into your HTML, but it's a little tricky because you might not, it's one of those things where you have to go back and forth. So I like this feature just because it lets you show playlists, and there's nothing requiring you to use JW Player's list bar rendering. You can make, if you wanted something to be more responsive, that logic isn't very difficult because all it's doing is taking that entry and telling the initializer to play that content. And so that's again, you can use this built-in feature or you can expand it just using the JW Player APIs to do something completely different that doesn't rely on this feature. But just to show you what that looks like in code, not only, obviously this is for content where you have a catalog around it where you might have related content, or in this case, like if I have chapters and I want to show them onto the side, show lots of pieces of content that are related to each other. I'm going to go ahead and bring that up, this playlist example here. And you can see that the playlist, again, it's just a big old jumble of, it's an array here. Again, if you ever see a left bracket, that means it's the start of an array. An array has items in it, so the first item in this list is going to be the first one in the playlist. And so those are consistent properties for playlists. I get so used to just using one items in playlists too, even if I don't have a true playlist, it's just one piece of content. I always set up the stub code, whether it's in PHP or whatever the middleware that's rendering this player, to just use a playlist and then enumerate through the pieces of content that need to go into it, so that I don't have to you don't have to use the playlist parameter, but I just, by habit, even if I have one piece of content, just get into the habit of using the playlist property with just one item in it. And you can see I'm going through, and this is something where, in the session description, I mentioned Wowza. There is a bit of a love affair. I guess it's an unofficial love affair with Wowza and JW Player, because if you look at Wowza's documentation, they have a lot of features that are specifically geared to JW Player. In fact, if you have a smile manifest of adaptive bit rates, they have a built-in JW Player smile renderer. They don't just have that for any other player, so Wowza will render that out so that it's friendly with JW Player. In this example, I'm showing two parameters. So this is something that they don't really talk about it a whole lot. When you're at conferences, it's hard to do deep dives when people are just learning a tool. But you'll see, if you're familiar with how an HLS URL looks like, it just ends with M3U8 usually, and that's the syntax to get an adaptive stream coming out of Wowza. I'm taking an adaptive smile file that's written in Wowza parlance and having Wowza translated into an HLS playlist. But you can also send these query parameters. So you can slice and dice your HLS stream up or any HTTP delivered stream. It'd be the same for Dash or HDS if you're using those protocols. But JW Player is partial to HLS, so it's pretty much standardized around HLS. As long as you remember the parameter names, in this case, Wowza Play Start and Wowza Play Duration, you can create these, I'll call them pseudo playlists, because it's the same piece of content. I'm just carving it up so that I don't have to physically make different files to carve up this piece of content and still have the benefit of a playlist. I will say that it's not exact. It's going to be based on the chunking interval that your HLS parameters are set up to. So if you're encoding at 10-second chunks, 30-second chunks, whatever your encoding and parameters are set up into Wowza, you always have to start playing with a chunk, so it might be off by, it's not going to be frame accurate, right? But it's likely going to be close enough for the kind of playback and buffering that's going to be required here. So that's all I did was vary the start and duration parameters of each of the items. I only did 3 segments. I didn't build out the whole piece in this example. But again, if I go ahead and just bring this up, playlist.html, There's the JW player's rendering that. Again, it will do this in Flash. It will do it in HTML5. It'll look consistent. And it even, puts the name of the current item in the playlist into the play button. And, you can skip around and start. So when this starts playing, again, it's not frame accurate. See, you showed me the fade out before it goes to that segment. So it actually showed me a bit of that chunk's keyframe started just before that. But it's close enough. I mean, if I really wanted exact control over it, then I would go ahead and pre-segment the content into these different clips. But it allows me to either play the whole clip altogether real easily, or break it up into chapters. And again, I didn't do it in this example, but I could make thumbnails and thumbnails for this segment too. I'm not enabling them, but you can go through and you still get all the richness of any other feature that you want it to add into that play experience. Okay, now I'm going to get to more. So these next two things are very Wowza specific, right? So I mean, playlisting isn't Wowza specific. The way I pulled it off in that example was Wowza specific. This next feature that I'm going to talk about, NDVR, this is something where, as far as I know, and I could be wrong because sometimes I get the news late because I'm heads down on a project where we've already made decisions. But NDVR is just the ability to have a sliding window in a live broadcast. And it's funny. I often think that we all like to say this is the year of, and I thought this would be the year of DVR. That I'd see more clients that come to us for live streaming needs wanting NDVR features. It's been hit or miss, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I'd say we've had more successes than failures, but the NDVR, depending on how you configure it, especially if it's a larger broadcast, the only incident I should say we've had to date where it was behind the firewall installation for a government installation where it wasn't quite clear if there were some proxying issues, but there was some rewinding happening in the stream during the live playback that we weren't anticipating. So we didn't know if it was a proxy caching segments from the NDVR that was causing this. But that's one of the, when you start to play with these more enhanced features, you're playing with more, I don't want to say bleeding edge tech, but there's a lot of things that come together here. You've got Wowza settings that you need to make sure of. You've got potentially transcoder settings that you need to make sure are in line with the chunking that's going on with NDVR, and you've got the player to be concerned about. The only other player that I know of that supported NDVR and you needed HDS to do it was Adobe's Strobe Media Playback player. And I don't want to say it's retired, but osmf.org isn't really something that Adobe puts anything into anymore. In fact, they may have taken it down, if I remember. But I still have plenty of clients that have Strobe Media Playback running on their websites that they just don't want to change yet. So NDVR, I mean, basically, what does that mean? Well, again, I mentioned earlier, JW Player uses HLS as its go-to HTTP streamer. If you've been at other sessions with JW Player reps like John Luther, they mentioned that Dash is something that they're working on. So, they respond to the industry once something's ready. You're not going to see things that aren't ready introduced in any off-the-shelf player. It's hard for them to justify it. But with Wowza, again, you just have to add a query to any HLS URL that's coming out, any live stream that's coming out. So in this case, I just have a simple server app stream reference there. But you just end with capital DVR, and you now have a DVR stream. It's really simple. I mean, you do have to enable it in Wowza. If you're not familiar with Wowza, I think I have it's in min panel open over here. So this is Wowza streaming engine running, and just to make sure, I made this is running on my local machine, by the way. You'll see it says local host, and I made a new application that I just called Stream Media West. I mean, I literally did this in like 5 minutes last night when I was just resetting up this example on this laptop. And I just had to make sure that the NDVR was enabled. There is an additional licensing charge for NDVR. It's not much. It's not going to break the bank, that's for sure. You enable it. I did set the window to only be 30 minutes, so it's only going to store 30 minutes worth of live content. You could set it to be indefinite, so basically as long as you have enough storage to store those chunks as it's creating them. And you can set if it's a pending. That's really nice. So if you have like a series of events that run back to back, like this show, like if you had one session after another, you can just have the archive method set to append, so it won't delete the previous recording that came over on that same stream name, and that way you can back up indefinitely. So if like I have a sports casting client that, this is fun, so if a team has several broadcasts and you just want to have games back to back to back, you can literally just have this setup. So if they're watching the live game, they can watch the live game, but if they wanted to see yesterday's game, they can just rewind and see the game without changing a thing. So that's all you have to do. I actually have it running on the command line here on my Mac. I just ran it as a service in the background. I don't like Wowza just running all the time on my laptop, so I manually started it up. I have Wirecast streaming myself to localhost here, and again, it's just a matter of taking. It's pretty straightforward. Let me make sure. Oh, there it is in DVR. I already have it pulled up here. So so again, for this to work, you only specify an HLS URL. You can't do NDVR over RTMP, at least not currently, and I don't know if it's something they'll ever work on. Again, the world's moving more to an HTTP model and not real-time protocols. So here it is. It's just a simple playlist reference with DVR set to it. And again, this is important because obviously Dash isn't supported in a ton of browsers yet. There are obviously Google and Microsoft are huge with Dash, so if you have the latest and greatest IE, but for the most part, desktop users are relying on Flash and JW Player's Flash code, right? They spend a lot of effort basically making an HLS parser or decompiler, whatever you want to call it, in Flash as part of their engine. And if I load this up right now, let me go ahead and bring that up. I think I don't know why I called it Columbia. It has nothing to do with the Columbia River because this is just a live stream of me. But if I pull this up, and this is a delayed stream right now, mainly because, and that's the other bad news. I have clients that are so used to RTMP, especially if they're doing live events and they don't want any latency. You're always going to have a pretty decent latency with any HTTP streaming manifest, right? You need chunks gathering on the server, chunks need to download. You can make it short at the expense of higher encoding parameters, higher bit rates and stuff like that, but for the most part, folks are okay with the delay. You can see that this is the live stream, but more importantly, and you can see that I've got, just like I would on a TV set DVR, I can see that I can actually back up. It says live, but I've got a full, JW Player showing it as 29 minutes and 50 seconds, but I can now back up into the stream to where I was earlier in this talk and see what I was talking about then. And there in fact, it's because I had this set to append. Oh, well, obviously I've been I had the setup footage of me sitting at the table during the Skype, and it's already erased that from the buffer, right? Because I said 30 minutes only. So I've obviously been talking for longer than 30 minutes at this point. So, but I can back it up. And this is a bit of a, this can act a little, and I'm not blaming JW Player for this. This whole GUI is hard. And this works on iOS natively, so Apple's behind NDVR. So if I'm on an iPhone, even without JW Player's rendering of it, I can just pass a DVR URL to iOS on an iPhone, and I'll have this same backup capability. It's pretty cool. You don't need JW Player to do it on iPhone. It'll just work. And I presume we'll see better support of it with Android. They're just slow on the uptake with HLS, so they eventually start to support more and more of the HLS spec. So again, the vast majority of playback is going to rely on Flash on desktop. You may not get this to work on Android, depending on what flavor of Android you're running and its very supportive HLS. I should add that that's a relatively new parameter, and I have it listed here. It was introduced with one of the dot updates to JW Player 6, but the JW Player's position on Android and HLS was just don't use it. Like, it's too buggy, so if you pass an HLS URL to an initializer like this and you're on Android, it just would ignore it. And if it was the only source you had, it would give you that message, no playable sources found on Android. They've now sent, I guess because enough people, I complained about this. I'm like, well, come on, what if I just want to force it? I mean, it's better than nothing. So they finally added a parameter called Android HLS, all lowercase. by default, it's set to false, so I'm setting it to true here. So what that means is that if I'm on an Android smartphone, it will at least attempt to play this HLS URL in the Android browser that I'm using. It may or may not work. I might still get an error. You can also, I set the fallback to false, and so there is code. I should say that JW Player is pretty strict with this parameter. It still looks for Android 4.0, maybe even 4.1 or higher. I have to check the docs. So if you're coming with Android 3, it's still going to say no playable sources found. It's like, sure, you said true, but it should actually say Android 4 HLS, because it's not just Android across the board. It's just it's still doing some logic check. It's still doing JavaScript checks in the background to see what version of Android. So the go-to, and since I'm doing live, that I typically do, especially with, by and large, we're doing Wowza installations. We do Akamai configs for clients too, but our TSP is one of those go-to formats for Android. It works well. I can show you my S2, my Galaxy S2 device, and it will basically, let me give you a quick rundown of how a scenario like this might, what if I'm coming with Android 3 or, God forbid, Android 2.2 or something. If you set fallback to false, what that will do is tell JW Player to render, if it determines that you have no playable sources specified, like, hey, you only specified HLS, so I'm not going to, I'm not going to show that, I'm going to show an error instead. If you set fallback to false, it's basically not touching your div that you're telling it to write into the player. So it leaves it as is. So this is cool. I like this approach because it means I can set up whatever code that I want. In this case, I'm just throwing in a very blanket, simple video tag where, I force an HLS URL just so that the user can try and attempt it. Maybe they've got some weird older version of Android that does support HLS and maybe a DVR feature. But more importantly, below it, it's not elegant from a UX perspective. And if this is just an example, so I have clients that embellish the graphics here, but I just provide an Ahref clickable link to the RTSP stream. And it's not going to be NDVR. It's not going to be adaptive. It's going to usually be one of the stream bit rates that is going to be compatible with mobile. It's going to be H.264 baseline, sort of your lowest common denominator mobile stream. And just provide it as a link. And you can see I just have the generic text there. Video not playing, click this link. And I don't have a smartphone running to show you, but just if I were to just copy and paste this, I didn't actually try this. And VLC's crashed. Great, excellent. Let me go ahead and force quit VLC. But if I had any, I could even do this with QuickTime Player. But it's just a RTSP link. Again, BlackBerry, if that's still on the radar for some of your networks. Again, this, it's just the RTSP link. Oh, I can't open it. Oh, did I turn off the server? Did I get a name wrong? 1930. I'm telling it to go over 1935 too. So failed demo. I'm not going to continue that. But if all the ports are set up properly, I'm forcing RTSP to go over 1935 because since I'm running it in dev mode, I'm not binding Wowza to any other ports. Traditionally, RTSP, of course, as most of you know, is 554. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out as an aside. That's a common scenario for a live broadcast with our smaller clients, where they want to have a fallback that's going to work. Again, if you don't have a budget for a native app and you're doing a lot of live broadcasts, you got to be able to hopefully try and provide something. All right, well, let me continue. I'm almost done, and I think I'm almost out of time. What time do I end here? Can someone tell me real quick? Anyone know? I think I've got 45 minutes and I started at 10:30. Oh gosh, and I'm already over. So I got to wrap it up. Captions are pretty much exactly the same. I'm like the Skype guy now. I'm over. Captions VTT, it's the same kind of, I'm not even going to bring up the VTT file. It's exactly like those other tracks that I showed you, and it's just going to display captions consistently in Flash and HTML. So pretty simple to add that. And see, I'm on my last slide already. So, I gave a version of this seminar at JW Player Insights. They started this one-day conference, and I was talking about these things that would be a nice to have. Android playback, for example, was just not allowed. It now is, so I said that's no longer the future. You can do that now. Casting capabilities, they've also recently added. You need the enterprise version. I should I forgot to mention that. You need the enterprise version, which isn't, it says call us, but it's not as expensive as you think. They will base it on your deployment, but for a lot of my smaller clients, $500 is all they're asking for, the enterprise license. Don't quote me on that. I don't want to get in trouble with those guys, but they might ask for more if they know that you're doing something huge and whatnot. But the enterprise license is not out of reach. I should just mention that. But you do need that for NDVR. You would need that for the casting capabilities. If you want to add Chromecast to your JW Player installs, you can now do that. It's pretty cool. But there's still a lot, when it comes to custom player development, which is a lot of what we do at VideoRx, there's still features that, aren't easy to support or even they're not achievable with the current HTML5 spec. But in a flashless world, doing things like clickable video where you want to map regions inside of the player, that's just, we're not there yet, right? So it doesn't matter if it's JW Player or someone else. I think we can come up with a schema that works that would be pretty cool for truly interactive video. Again, you have a native app, sky's the limit, but hopefully your budget is too. And then lastly, e-learning features. A lot of our clients want play rate control, things that are being able to put save on the fly markers and have those kind of marking capabilities directly into the play bar. That would be a little bit harder to achieve by using an off-the-shelf player. I don't care if it's JW Player or not, to add your own controls into it that aren't part of its native API. You're probably going up the road of custom player development at that point. You can use, there is a Chromeless version of JW Player, as there are other off-the-shelf players. So if you just want JW Player to be responsible for all the source handling and build your own play bar, you could do that, but then it's not going to be rendered in Flash. It's only going to be rendered in HTML5, and so there's all sorts of things that's one of the nice things. I mentioned it, I think, during one of my previous sessions, that when you're developing a really good player, you're redundant with a lot of your logic because you're building it in ActionScript and you're doing it in JavaScript so that you're consistent across the board all the way back through legacy browsers. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to find me after the conference. Thank you.